Nassim, and I'm excited to share a little bit with you today. So a little bit about me. As I said, I'm Fatma, and my pronouns are she and her. I have a bachelor's in business and psychology, and I have a master's in industrial organizational psychology as well. And a little bit about why I'm doing this is because it's not just that I know about this through my own journey and experiences, it's also because I have the knowledge and the skills that are related to professional development. And that's because I understand what employers are looking for in candidates. So I have HR experience at UW as well as at Amazon in the past. And I've worked in talent acquisition, sourcing candidates, interviewing, hiring, and onboarding candidates at the UW. And this was during my time in the finance transformation program. So I'm sure you may have heard about that. And I was in the technical pillar. And so FPP, which was my pillar, was the only pillar that had an operations team that was responsible for resource management. And one of the recommendations that emerged from the lessons learned was to include an operations team for all the pillars in the next implementation. And that one will probably be the student database implementation. So just a little bit about my background and my experience. So everything you're seeing listed up there, I have experience in, including DEI involvement and coaching. Next slide. So just go over the agenda. I've already done the introduction, and we'll talk about doing an elevator pitch, writing cover letters, yay, everyone's favorite topic, then resumes, a little bit about social media, and then some interview tips. And then hopefully we'll have some time left for Q&A. So next slide, this is on the elevator pitch. Of course, I guess if you ask, depending on who you ask, it could be the dreaded elevator pitch because it's something that everyone recommends that you should have. So what does that look like? I've included a little bit here about the core elements and the structure of an elevator pitch. So the first component is your introduction. So how are you going to hook or engage the listener? That's the first piece. Next, you want to identify.
Fatma?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry
yes.
to interrupt. It looks like there's an issue with the slide, so I'm going to reshare it. People said they weren't able to see. I'm so sorry, everyone.
No, that's okay.
I just saw the chat was like going. So wait, can people confirm with me? Oh wait, you know what it's saying? Oh, maybe it's on a different window. I'm so sorry. All the tech stuff.
No worries. There's always it's not a presentation or a meeting without technical issues.
Right. Okay, can people see it yet? It says it I'm screen sharing. Okay, hold on. I should have tested this before.
No worries.
1 sec.
And I hope I'm not going too fast. I just really am trying to get through all the content because I've packed in a lot. So hopefully that's okay.
I'm just going to restart the slideshow and then I'll try to reshare it.
No worries.
It says it's loading.
Okay.
What is it looking like for you? Anything?
Still black and gray.
Black.
I wonder if it might be my laptop. I don't know why it's doing this. I have not had any issues recently.
It's because it's Monday.
I know. It's like it's warming up for
It's
stuff.
like your computer went to sleep over the weekend.
Yeah, just like me. Okay. I closed out the window. Okay, I think it's still having issues. Fatma, would you like to share it yourself?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. I don't know why it's doing that.
That's okay. These things happen. I will just pull it up.
But just so everyone knows, this is recorded, and we'll make sure to share all the slides with you after so you can look at them.
Okay.
I need to figure out what's wrong with my laptop, clearly.
No worries. I'm going to go into presentation mode here. And of course, that's going to do some other funky things here on my side. Let's see here. I think I have to, oh. Share my screen. Go. All right, how is that?
I can see yours. That's perfect. Yay.
Awesome. All right, glad we got that figured out. Okay, so I was just starting to talk about the elevator pitch. I'll just start at the beginning. So the core elements and the structure, right? So you've got your intro and you're going to want a hook, something to engage your listeners. Next, you want to identify, oh, sorry, on the slide. Slide. Let me do that. Sorry, 1 second. Really does not want to be moved. Sorry about that. Okay, I will get this figured out. Thank you all for bearing
You're
with
doing
me.
amazing.
Okay. Oh, all good. Okay, perfect. So the hook and then your specific skill or the problem that you solve. So next, you're going to want to position yourself as the expert and the problem solver, right? Because you're the best person for this. And then you can touch on who would benefit from your skill set. And then lastly, and most importantly, your value proposition. You want to differentiate yourself. So that's the structure of the pitch. The other thing I really wanted to talk about as well is the delivery, right? Like you want to sound smooth. So sometimes we can have an elevator pitch, but it's not going to do you any good if you just create it and then leave it, right? So you're going to want to practice it perhaps in scenarios where it's like low stakes, right? You're meeting someone who's a new colleague or whatever, right? And maybe you don't have to share like the whole pitch, but just try practicing some of the verbiage, right? Whatever that may look like. And that way, in a scenario where perhaps you do end up meeting someone in a situation where it's like, oh my gosh, I need to impress this person. So hopefully you'll have a much more smooth delivery by then. That's the whole purpose of having that. So we'll go to the next slide. So this is a little bit about the hook and what does that look like? So there are several strategies to capture people's attention. The direct approach, which is just very straightforward. You can introduce yourself, or you could ask a question, initiate their curiosity. And then third, you can make a compelling or thought-provoking statement, right? Just get them thinking. And your unique value proposition. So the components for that are, what are those relevant skills? Like what's significant here? And talk about how you can add value, right? And like I said before, just, differentiating yourself and why are you the best person? So really like digging into that, right? All right, so here's a cohesive elevator pitch once you put all the parts together. So you've got your hook. This is a very straightforward one. Hi, I'm Mary. I'm a business analyst at the University of Washington. What's the problem that's being solved? It's great to meet you. I specialize in analyzing banking reconciliations, which is not only difficult, but also time consuming and expensive, right? So those are the two problems. It's time consuming and costly. Next, you talk a little bit about the skill set, what's relevant here. So to increase company productivity, modern technologies need to be implemented. And that's where I come in. With 5 years of experience focusing on these issues, plus expertise in writing computer code and database management, I bring with me a unique skill set that allows me to recognize organic opportunities. Perfect. All right, what's the value prop? Additionally, my Six Sigma black belt and certification and continuous learning via Pluralsight keeps me up to date with the latest technologies and processes to reduce costs while maximizing productivity. Wow. Okay. So you stated the problem, you shared your skill set, and then you close the loop on this is how I can help solve this problem for you. And I'm the best person to do this, right? So before I switch over to the next topic, I just want to pause for a second and check in. Are there any questions about the elevator pitch? Sorry, I don't have the comments open here. Any questions in the chat, Tiana?
There are not any right now.
Okay,
I
perfect.
have a question.
Yes.
Thanks for this. I guess I want to make sure I'm understanding. Is the elevator pitch separate from like a cover letter? Because the way you wrote it out sounded like a cover letter. And in a state agency, how do we utilize something like this without violating like ethics? There's some, I'm just curious.
Yes, absolutely. Great question, Sarah. So an elevator pitch is distinct from your cover letter. I will actually talk about that a little bit later and what that looks like and what all that entails. So you're like a couple steps ahead. You're already thinking about that. And one of the things that I will refer back to about the elevator pitch is that your cover letter and your elevator pitch, you would want them to be in alignment, right? So everything is kind of building on itself, right? So it's like your elevator pitch is like, if you could think of it like as a commercial or an advertisement about you, right? Like it's like a mini bite-sized little, encapsulated sound bite. And then your cover letter is going to be a little bit more like specifically tailored to that job, right? And then your resume is like your full comprehensive history, right? So you'll just see a little bit more as I go through that. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I guess where are you using the elevator pitch? Or is it just something like a tool you're using to draft everything else?
So you would use it, like I was saying, if you're meeting a new colleague, right? You could even like share a little bit with them about like what you've done, but want to practice it for the reason. So this is actually a great question. So the whole thought behind this is like, if you get into an elevator, I'm sure you're familiar with the background of like you get into an
Yeah.
elevator, you run into a manager from another department or whatever. How do you sell yourself in like those 20 seconds or whatever it takes you to get to the floor you're going to, right? So it is still helpful in those scenarios, right? And we don't always think about this unless and until we're looking for a job, right? It's so easy to just not even think about that. But it can be really helpful for just networking, right? When people say, oh, networking is so hard. What do you say? What do you do? Perfect.
Gotcha.
Use that elevator pitch, right?
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, I guess I was seeing it. Was it like part of a job acquisition process? But you're saying it's kind of laying the groundwork for getting that started. And I think I must have missed that in the beginning. So thank you for clarifying.
Absolutely. No, happy to help. I'm glad you asked.
Fatma,
All
can I
right.
also mention, there was a comment in the chat about people using this as an introduction question in their interviews. So just
Mhm.
leading in with the elevator pitch, would you recommend that?
Ooh, that's a really great question. So I would say no. And the reason
Okay.
I'm saying that is because I feel like it would not have the necessary information you're going to want to include in that first question of tell me about yourself.
Oh.
Okay. So, and I can go into that a little bit more once we get to the information about the interview. So can we maybe put that like in a parking lot? And if you just wouldn't mind reminding me, Tiana, that would be great.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Of course. Okay, excellent. So we would be remiss if we did not mention the role that AI is now playing in everything, including our job preparation. So there are several elevator pitch tools that you can use. There's a free tool called Writer Buddy. Now, Tiana, I know you and I talked about possibly doing a demo, but I do think it's pretty straightforward. It sounds like with the questions that are building, I think there'll be more stuff when I get to the interview stuff. So I can skip that, but I have the link included in the resources. What do you think? Is that okay?
Yeah, I think let's maybe table it until the end. If we have time to
Okay.
do any tutorial people like, that probably is the best, just so we can get through the content first.
That sounds great.
Okay.
So it is pretty simple and easy to use. I mean, I'm looking at the site right now. I had it pulled up on the side here. When you go to the web page, it gives you a little blank box, and you would just put in, so like we talked about, the hook, your skill set, right, your value proposition, and then it drafts something for you. So there's that. There are so many other paid tools that you can use. So of course it's there. If you're comfortable using it, go for it. But again, the key thing that I just wanted to share here is it's okay to use that as a starting point, but you just really want to give it your own voice. Otherwise, it's going to sound very awkward if it's not your natural style of how you speak, which I don't think any of us talk like AI. So you're going to want to just really personalize it and customize it to you and your style. All right, so next topic, cover letters. And this is another interesting thing where it seems like a lot of companies don't even ask for cover letters anymore, but a lot of state jobs do. So, so of course they're still around, but it's I've heard mixed opinions on this. A lot of people don't even bother to read cover letters, but if you're applying for a job that is asking for it, they likely will look at that. So we'll just talk a little bit about what that looks like. So the key components for that are it's the letter form, well, a little bit about the letter format is that it's in the letter format, right? So you have your name, your contact information at the very top. You're going to want to include the date, and then of course, again, that personal voice for the formatting. And then as far as the content is concerned, you want to start out by indicating an interest, show some enthusiasm in the role, in the company, discuss your current position, and then of course connect that to the relevant experience that's needed in that position, right? You're going to want to provide details of, so this is getting a little bit now into how you speak to this in your interview, right? So you'll hear me say you want to talk about your actions and those outcomes. So it's getting a little bit into that, but still not as much detail as you would provide in an interview. And then of course, really highlight that unique value proposition. And like I said before, just tie in your elevator pitch as well. So if you were to look at your elevator pitch and you're going to build these things on each other, you would use the elevator pitch for that, networking tool, but then go back and read your cover letter. And does the elevator pitch set up the cover letter, right? And if it does and everything's in alignment, great, right? That's just a great spot check to make sure everything is aligning really well. Any questions on that before I move forward? There's more
Any
here.
guidance on how long a cover letter should be? I assume it's a happy medium of not too short and not too long, but curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Correct. I would say 1 page. I would say you don't want to go beyond a page, which is sort of the old rule of thumb about resumes, but that's okay. Resumes can go longer, but cover letter, keep it to a page. All right. Oh, next here, resume styles. So now that you have your commercial advertisement about you, and you have like this cover letter that sets up a little bit about what you've done, you've got your full history on your resume. And then these are the most commonly used styles, the chronological, the functional, and the combination. And the difference here is that the chronological is great for someone who's like a seasoned, experienced professional, and they can just stack all of their experiences. Excuse me 1 second here. I need to. Can I just pause this for like 1 second, you all? I'm so sorry.
No worries, of course.
It's like preventing me from seeing my notes here. So I'm trying to clear that up. I apologize.
Take your time.
Okay, great. I think I've got it worded. I did not expect this. Okay, perfect. All right, let me resume here. Okay, is that visible?
Yes, yeah, can still see the slide.
Perfect. Okay. So yes, so anyone who's seasoned has consistent experience and they've been in perhaps the same industry or the same job profile for a long time, the chronological style will be great. If you also have no gaps in your employment, it's just clean, makes sense. You're going to start with your most recent experience first and work your way backwards. And then you can include your education either at the very top or at the bottom. And this can vary depending on how long you've been employed. So perhaps if you're newer to the job force, you can put it at the top. But if you have a lot of experience, it's okay to put it at the bottom because they're going to be looking at your experience more than the education. It's whatever you want to highlight that you want at the very top. The next style is functional. So this is great if someone has like either gaps in their employment or if they've changed their career, perhaps they've like worked across different industries. And so the key, thing here that you want to highlight is your skill set. And that's why you put the skills section at the very top, and then you put your work history after that. And then the last style, which is the combination style. So this is obviously a hybrid of the two. So you highlight your skill set over the job experience because, again, perhaps there are gaps or there's inconsistencies. Or sometimes this is great for an early career professional as well, because you can put the skills from your education and whatever jobs you have and pull that. And then you can list your experiences below that. Any questions on that?
I actually have a question. When
Go
it
ahead.
comes to including, like, some people I've seen will put a picture, like a headshot on their resume. What would
Mhm.
you say? Like, would you advise someone to avoid that because I feel like it can lead to bias, or do you think it really has an effect at all?
I would say, well, first of all, a great question, Tiana. So it's interesting because I think industry standards are just so different across different places, different countries. Here in the US, we don't prefer that. We don't want you to, oops, sorry, my stuff keeps looking around. We don't like to see those headshots just because it's, like you said, you don't want to deal with any sort of bias or anything like that. Um, all of that information we recommend leaving out, right? So you also don't want to include things like your address, for example, right?
Mhm.
There was a time when you would include that, but not anymore. Um, so little things like that, yes, definitely not. But again, in other countries, so if you were applying abroad in some other country, they could have other standards, like they like seeing a picture, they like seeing that headshot. Some places they want your full address. Um, there's instances of like some places people put their marital status and things of that nature. But again, in the US, you want to leave all those things out,
Okay, thank you.
of course. All right. So next we have resume do's and don'ts. And there's a lot, but I tried to limit it to what I could just fit in here. And then of course, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer. So, of course, your contact information, you want to include both your phone number and email. Once upon a time, many years ago, one of the digits of my phone number was wrong. So just really check that it couldn't get a hold of me. It's happened to me. So, and then just review the job description to, ensure that all your relevant necessary experience is on the resume. For the content. And actually, before I go to the content, one more thing, the relevant experience and including, weaving in, excuse me, your value proposition, right? So again, tying it back to that elevator pitch that had that unique value prop, you're just going to see that like woven through everything. You're going to see that in the cover letter, you're going to put that on your resume. And, so it should be very consistent. So they're hearing it over and over again. You're kind of just like really using, that subtle psychology of telling them that repeatedly. So it really sinks in. So for the content of, use that third person voice. It's best to use past tense grammar for consistency. And it's great if you can use action oriented language to highlight your efforts and the impact. And of course, proofreading. So just, really make sure that everything looks perfect. It's not a great first impression if there are errors in your resume. Um, Sometimes I've seen resumes that I'm laughing because I'm thinking about some resumes that I've seen where it's like the tiniest little, margins, the most narrow margins, and like the teeniest, tiniest font. It's really hard. It's just most likely that what will probably end up happening is people won't read it. I'm just going to say that very directly is probably what's going to happen. Like I said before, don't include your street address on your resume. And then it's also not necessary to include every single job. If you have like over 10 or 15 years of experience, leave like the last 7 to 10, whatever is the most relevant. And I know sometimes it can be tempting where I've seen, like I said, those resumes that have the teeniest, tiniest little bit of font. I understand people are trying to get all those keywords, and try to get through the applicant tracking systems. But that's where your resume structure will come in really handy, right? So if you are going to put your skill sets at the top, use those keywords as part of that skill set list, right? So that way you don't have to have like size 8 font and the narrowest margins to try to squeeze in all those words and capture all that language. I'm just pausing here for a second. Any questions as I'm sharing all of this?
I see a raised hand, Fatma, from Steve.
Okay, great. Yes, go ahead, Steve.
Hey, Steve.
Hi there. This is a splendid presentation. Thank you very much for your time and effort today, everybody involved. I've seen a lot of notes out there in industry on quantification of accomplishments. Like, don't just say, I did these projects and they were successful, but like put a dollar amount on it, or, you know, whatever, quantify it in some way with numbers. But a lot of us here work very collaboratively with people, and group efforts get things done. So it's hard to quantify, right, on one's resume sometimes. So just any thoughts about that or experience there with numbers on your resume?
Yes, absolutely. Great question. So absolutely agree. If at all possible, try to quantify your result, right? Whatever efforts you've made, if at all possible. But to your point, Steve, I understand it's not always possible where you are collaborating. So what you can do in that scenario is really emphasize whether, and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but I would say, so if I'm collaborating with a group of people, whether that's like stakeholder engagement, or whether it's my team, stakeholder management, whatever terminology you can use to present that, it's, you want to do that. But it's also okay, again, to also say, I did XYZ, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more once I get into the topic of, how to speak to this in your interview, because you really want to illustrate that direct connection between like your effort and that outcome. So it's okay to, and it's funny, I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's okay to brag a little bit on your resume, because the hiring managers want to know like what it is that you are capable of, like what are your capabilities. So that's okay. Hopefully that's helpful. All right, so we will go to the next slide. So professional social media, which maybe sounds a little bit contradictory because it's professional and it's social media. So this is just a little bit about your LinkedIn profile, and you of course want to keep that up to date. And I will say this, so I can speak to this, I will say this very confidently. Hiring managers, recruiters, they are all on LinkedIn. So if someone does not have a LinkedIn profile, and this was my personal perception too while I was hiring, I'm just going to say this, I'm going to make a very bold statement. If someone did not have a LinkedIn profile, that was strange. That was a little bit of a, like, maybe not a red flag, but I would say at least like a yellow curiosity of like, why does this person not have a LinkedIn profile? So that's my personal opinion. But I will say recruiters, hiring managers, all those people are very, very highly active on LinkedIn. So if this is something, if you are on the job market, if you are looking for a new job, you want to be on LinkedIn and you want to have a strong profile, right? So include all your job experience there. The place where you don't put it, which is your resume, it's okay to go ahead and include all of that on your LinkedIn profile. And this is why it's that combination of both professional and social media. It's okay to include like your volunteer work, your interests, and all those things. You can show a little bit more of your personality here. There are so many features in LinkedIn, which I mean, I don't even think I utilize all of them to the greatest extent, but you can also reflect whether you're actively searching or passively looking, where it's only visible to recruiters or it's visible to everyone. I want to emphasize the importance of a professional picture. So this is, again, we're straddling that line of professional and social media, right? It's okay to bring your personality, but you want to be mindful, right, of like your industry, your organization. And again, it's okay to show your personality. But just one example I can share, right? So I was previously in finance, and all my colleagues, all their pictures were very professional, right? Like everyone's in suits and blazers and all of that. But then I've seen some really cool, you know, profiles, which someone who might be like in marketing or something, right? They might have like a fun picture with their dog or their pets or whatever. That's okay. It just, as long as it's aligning with your industry and a little bit of your personality, that's okay. But just being mindful of that, right? And of course, as a hiring manager, a person who was a hiring manager, when I would go and look at a LinkedIn profile, I would see those pictures, right? So again, just being mindful of any professional hiring manager or, colleague can go and find that. So I'll leave it at that. Next, recommendations. I think this is really underrated. I don't know that a lot of people use these. I don't think a lot of people use these recommendations. I love this feature. I think this is like one of the best features that LinkedIn has. So when you're leaving a position, ask your manager if they'd be willing to write you a recommendation. And let's say it was like your previous role or a couple of jobs back. It's okay, reach out, just get in contact and ask if they would be willing to do it. I think that speaks a lot to someone's skills. If I see their LinkedIn profile and there's a recommendation from their manager saying this was like, an amazing person to have on my team, whatever, like whatever they've said, if they speak highly and there's like glowing recommendations from their colleagues and their managers, it's like, oh, wow, okay, like this is saying a lot about this person. So I would say don't discount or minimize the impact that these recommendations can have. Next, your maximum professional experience, right? So again, it's okay to put things in here that you may have left out of your resume. This is the place for all of that. And then one more note. So I know I already mentioned this, but like I was saying on the resume, I think people try to put in everything because they're trying to get through the ATS system. Your LinkedIn profile is where you want to do that. So it's okay to throw in everything in the kitchen sink there. What else? Yes. So again, your post should be professional and in line with your elevator pitch, right? It's your brand. I think maybe if I could solidify this a little bit more or make this more clear, I would say your elevator pitch is your commercial advertisement about your brand, and then everything else would just be in line and alignment. So hopefully that's helpful.
I've asked a lot of questions, but I have so many now as you shared this slide. Just like pertaining to when you're job hunting, do you recommend that people reach out to, say, like someone at the company that you're looking at if there's a position and you can ask one of the employees, hey, would you be willing to share, your experience? Like, is that something that you think is helpful for people?
Absolutely. I
Okay.
would highly, highly recommend that, Tiana. That's one of the things that I personally like would never have done in the past, right? Because I would have felt like, oh gosh, I don't want to bother anyone or whatever. And then there was a time when I decided to do this as an experiment. I just thought, okay, I'm going to really just stretch my comfort zone here and try to reach out to people and see what happens. And I was so pleasantly surprised by just how kind and, just helpful people can be. I had complete strangers that were open to having like a 20-minute conversation with me and talk to me about their experience at a company, right? And that was why I had reached out actually. So I applied for a position and on the side, in fact, you'll see, and this is why it's designed this way, right? So you'll see on LinkedIn, perhaps who your contacts are in that organization, or you go to someone's profile and then you'll see on the right-hand column, other people also looked at XYZ individuals, right? And you'll see all these names and profiles pop up. So it's designed that way because they want you to use it that way. So it's okay to reach out to people, and people can be just so kind and, just helpful, just because they want to help, right? So yes, I would strongly encourage that.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, I've had people similarly reach out to me and ask about my experience, and I enjoy, just talking to people, whether it's Zoom, coffee. So thanks for that info.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
oh, sorry. There's another question in the chat from Sarah, and she asked if state employees or state employees are allowed to look at candidates' LinkedIn, and if so, is there any distinction between pro or classified staff? It's a good question.
Okay, so just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, so the question is asking if a state employer who's a hiring manager, if they're allowed to look at a LinkedIn profile? Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, I mean, it's open, right? Like anyone who's on LinkedIn can go and look at it. So yes, they are. It's not, of course, that's not what's used to make any final decision, right? Because of course there's a whole process and there's this whole vetting process, right? Like the screening, the interview, and all of that, and so on and so forth. And I think we all know at the university, most things happen, very collaboratively, right? So it's not one individual making that decision, but yes, of course, that's allowed, to people are allowed to go and look at that and gather more information.
Thank you.
Of course. Anything else? Oh, okay. All right. So the next slide here is interview tips. And again, this one is also highly condensed because I had a lot of content. I tried to just really limit that here. And of course, any questions that might come up, I'm happy to answer. But these are just, I think, I felt like these were some of the strongest interview tips that I could share that would be the most helpful and the most impactful. So the first thing is make a list of possible questions and then write out those responses. And I really want to emphasize this is not for memorization purposes. That's not what we're going to do with this list. It's simply to get you to organize your thoughts and to get that verbiage down, right? So that's the key purpose here. And, by this point, I think most people are pretty familiar with the standard interview questions, right? So it's like, it's pretty hard to get surprised by an interview question because we know they're going to be along the same lines of, tell me about a situation when, fill in the blank, right? Whatever skill sets they're looking for. And even that, it really should not be a surprise because if you just refer back to that job description, you should be able to go through the job description and bullet point by bullet point look at each skill and what they're going to ask you. So that's kind of what I personally do. So this is like the big, I guess if you want to call it secret or strategy or whatever, that's what I do for myself is like I look at the job description, make a list, pull out all the skill sets that they are referencing in that JD. And then when I'm sitting to write down those questions and create those answers, I really focus on those particular skills because I want to make sure I have strong stories that relate to those specific skills. So hopefully that's helpful. And the next thing is how to frame those responses. So I like to use this format. I've also heard it called different things now. Of course, there are all sorts of abbreviations and acronyms for what people want to call this, but I've heard it referred to as either a PAR or a SAR, which is like the situation. So you define what the situation was or what the problem was, and then you go into a little bit more detail about what was the action that you took. So you're just going to drill down and take the interviewer through the specific steps and then what was the final outcome of your actions. And that way, again, like I said before, you're just drawing that straight line of like, this was the problem, this is what I did, this was the outcome, right? You just want to illustrate that very clearly. Another thing that I like to use is lists. I'm a list person anyway, but it's also helpful while you're in the midst of an interview to just help create a little bit of structure and pick like 2 or 3 points in your response. And you can start out by saying, okay, so this was a situation, this was what was done, and then maybe break down your actions into like your top 2 or 3 actions that you took, right? And you can say, so first I did X, next or second I did Y, and then maybe like third I did Z, and then the outcome of those actions was your results, right? So it's again, it's just trying to keep it as clean as possible. the next point. This one is very easy to get tripped up on. And this is one that I've done as well in the past. So when they ask you a question, it's so easy because we have so much content in our mind and so many thoughts and ideas about our job. It's so easy to just choose one thought and then we just like go in the flow, right? And then all of a sudden it's like we've been talking for 2 minutes straight and the interviewer is still wondering like, wait, like where's the answer? And we're just so knee deep in our experience and what all the content and all the knowledge we have about that particular question. But it's just we seem to have, gotten lost a little bit. So the big strategy for that is when they ask you that question, summarize the main idea just right at the very top. So whatever that may be, whatever that looks like, state, this is my thesis. You can think of it as your thesis if that's helpful, right? And then you're going to prime them to listen out for the keywords, right? Like, let's just say, for example, if they say, like, what's your biggest strength, right? And you can, if you think, okay, these are my three strengths, right? So you can say, I think my three strengths are fill in the blank. And then first, or number one, go into the detail. Number two, details. Number three, details. And then at the end, just summarize it, right? And again, this is not like a, some new like strategy. It's like, tell them what you're going to tell them the thing, and then summarize by telling them what you told them, right? This is tried and tested. All right. Next thing is always ask questions. This, I have to say, I was absolutely shocked and astounded by how many times people would not ask questions. And I was truly just flabbergasted by that because how can anyone not have questions if they're genuinely interested in the job? My challenge was always like when I'm interviewing is like, I have too many questions. I have to pare them down and really just prioritize a couple of things. But please always come prepared. Just think about what's important to you. And I'll just give a couple of ideas from the things that I usually like to ask. I always like to know what is my target. Like I can't get to a destination if I don't know where I'm going, right? So for me, I always ask, okay, how will I be evaluated, right? So I want to know like what's important, how will I be measured, and then what are my targets, right? So I guess I put that backwards, but the first thing is like, what's the target? Like, what should I be accomplishing in the first 30 days or the first 60 days? What does that look like? What are those goals that I should have? And then secondly, how will that relate to my performance, right? So how will I be evaluated? Like, what are those metrics? What are the targets? What are my performance indicators? And then, of course, there are so many categories there, but these are just a couple of ideas of things to ask. And sometimes, you can flip their questions on them and ask, what's stressing you out right now about your job? Catch them off guard, maybe. So beyond that, pre-interview jitters, which of course is totally normal. We're all human. It's easy to get nervous. And I have a couple of strategies on that. And of course, there's a lot more if you just want to, like, if you were even to just Google this, there's so much out there. But I would say for one, we feel more anxious when we're not as prepared, right? So that's an easy one to mitigate. Just prepare. Just spend a little bit of time thinking about the questions, possible answers. I find that that's the most helpful for me because if I feel like I know what I'm getting myself into, then minimizes that stress and anxiety. Another thing you can do is you can reframe your nervousness as excitement. So instead of, oh gosh, I don't know how this is going to go, this could go horribly, reframe that as, so excited, I get to meet these new people and talk about this position that I'm really interested in. I get to find out more. I get to learn more about these people and the organization. And I know this isn't listed on here, but I think this is another important thing that sometimes we either forget or we lose sight of. So they're interviewing us, and we're also interviewing them, right? Because I want to know, is this organization, is this team, is this position a good fit for me? Like, does this align with what I want to do? And this is another thing that I've found has really helped me in the past when I'm in those scenarios, because it's like, oh yeah, wait, like I'm in the driver's seat too, because I could say no. I could say, I don't think this is a good, whatever, fill in the blank, org, team, position, whatever, once I get more information about it. It's empowering. So take back some of that power. Next, practice. So again, I know I said this in reference to the elevator pitch, and I will say it again for the interview itself. You want to practice. I've done it in front of a mirror before. You can do it with a friend or a colleague. And that way it will also help you just really get that verbiage down, and it will just make you more smooth. And that way you can be more in your flow when you're in that interview scenario. The next one, this is again, I think this is so underrated, and I'm shocked that I don't really see this anymore. So in the time that I was a hiring manager, I think, gosh, I think I can count on one hand the number of times that we ever got a follow-up email. And it's not a big deal because you don't have to do this, but I think this is just something that is such a you could consider this traditional. Sure, you could call it that. I personally see it as just a basic common courtesy, and it's just saying, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. It takes like 10 minutes to do, right? And you can craft like a little template if you want, which is hint, hint, what I do. And then just, use it for, because they're not gonna know. They don't know that you have a template, right? That you just use for all your interviews. Like, they don't know that. So that's what I would recommend. Just draft something. And of course, you want it to sound sincere and authentic, like, all those things. Keep that in mind. But yeah, but just summarize your excitement, how you could add value. And this is one other little, I guess you could call it a little tip or a secret. So there have been times when after an interview, I thought, oh gosh, like that one answer, I forgot to make this one point. I forgot to add this one little thing. And gosh, like I can't believe I didn't say that. So what I've done is when I was sending that thank you email, I said, oh, and thank you for that question about XYZ. And in addition to what I said, I also wanted to add fill in the blank, right? And then just as an afterthought, I felt like, oh, yay, okay, I got that little piece in there that I really wanted to say and I just forgot in the moment because of nerves or whatever. So it's great for sliding in a little bit of information there with that thank you email. And I know I'm a broken record now, but include that value proposition again if you want to. Just throw it in there at the very end. So that's that piece. And then lastly, just brevity, which, like I said before, sometimes it's easy when we start answering a question, we can get into that place of all the information that we have and all the content, and we just can get lost. If we're brief, that's better because then they can ask follow-up questions. And if they want to know more, they can, but they'll appreciate your responses if they are more concise. All right, so that is everything I've got.
This is amazing, Fatma. You did great on time. We still have like 5 minutes for questions. So I will share some that I saw in the chat. But first off, I just wanted to emphasize that point you made about sending a thank you email. That is very appreciated by the hiring managers, the people on the committee. My last job, I worked in recruiting. I was a recruiting coordinator. And the candidates that stood out were always the ones that sent that follow-up email. And they included like a point from the interview about like, oh, I really enjoyed our conversation about like XYZ. And I look forward to continuing our conversations in the future. So it literally takes like less than 10 minutes, like Fatma said. So always do it. And moving to our questions, Felicity, great question about going from non-manager positions to manager positions without a lot of supervision experience. How could you demonstrate that, Fatma? Like if you want to transition into a leadership position, but you don't have a lot of like on the job managerial experience, are there some like are roles that you've had in the past that can kind of translate to that you can share either on your resume or just in interviews?
Absolutely. So I kind of already said this, but I would say to frame it for this particular scenario, you want to look at that job description, right? And whatever skills they've sort of highlighted there, even if you haven't been a manager in the past, you can pull out aspects of that particular skill set that you've done in a past job, right? So, and again, this is like so personal to me, right? But I will just share my previous job where I became a people manager. I didn't have actually any management experience before that. But what I did have was I had experience being like a team lead in multiple jobs, right? And so I was able to illustrate that I had the skills to lead, right? So, because they're expecting a manager to lead. So, as long as you can illustrate those qualities and those skills of being a leader, right? That's what they care about. So I would just say build on that and expand on that based on the particular job description that you're looking at.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. I agree with those points.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask another question about follow-up questions that you ask in interviews. Do you have like a go-to? I know you mentioned like as a joke, kind of like, oh, what stresses you out about your job? But maybe like, what do you do in your day-to-day role, or like, how do you feel that you're able to like pursue the company's mission through your work or something like that?
Absolutely. I would say, and and I'm not being flippant, I promise. I'm just, but it's like, but aren't we genuinely curious about what that person's experience is like in that organization, on their team, right? Like if I could, I would ask them a lot of questions about what their experience has been like, right? What they enjoy, what challenges they have, right? Like, and I mean, again, I promise I'm not being facetious, but it's like, when you get asked, what's your 5-year plan, or where do you see yourself? Flip it on them, ask them, where do you see your team going in the next 5 years? Like, why not? It's important because I want to know, again, does the work of this team align with what I want to do, with the type of work that I want to do, right? It's okay to ask. I think everything's fair game.
That's great. Oh, I like the idea of flipping the questions. And then it's like easier if you forget the one you had to be like, what'd they ask me? Perfect.
Anything else?
I'm not seeing any others in the chat, but anyone else, feel free to ask any last minute questions. I can also stay on after if you have general questions about the program at all, this month's curriculum, happy to talk about it. In upcoming workshops, before we officially wrap up, we will have a part 2 of this, I believe, our series, hopefully this month. So I'll work with Fatma on getting that scheduled or figuring out something in the future for us to continue this conversation. But Felicity, feel free to ask your question.
When you are being during an interview and you're being asked a challenging supervisory example, and when you have an example of that you terminated somebody, is that something that you would mention?
So I would say, use your best judgment, because if you are interviewing for a position like that, of course they want to know how much experience you have with difficult conversations, right? So it's okay to give the context. Of course, you don't want to give details, right? But again, a very personal example to me, I'll just use that. So when I was interviewing for the current position that I'm in right now, the interviewer asked me, right, about, okay, tell me about your ability to use discretion, right, in your job. And it's like, you're asking me about discretion. How much can I and should I be sharing here right now, right? So it's contextual. It's okay to share context, speak to it high level. It's okay to give a specific example, right? Like I was able to do that in a question, same question, right? Tell me about a difficult situation with someone you were managing, right? So it's okay to provide specific context and details without names and, personal information. Anything else? And thank you, everyone. I'm just seeing the comments here in the chat.
There
Glad
was
this was helpful.
a question in the beginning that said the difference between elevator pitch and can you tell me more about your skill sets and how we should not use an elevator pitch for that? Can you go back and discuss more about that question then?
Sure. So, so just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, so the question about the elevator pitch and when to use that's what you're referencing?
Yes, I think so. I think someone in the chat has said, would it be appropriate to use an elevator pitch in an interview in which they ask, like, can you tell me
Right.
more about yourself? I think that was it.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And I'm so sorry. I did forget about that.
I
So
was
I
going
would
to bring it
say,
up, so thank you, Yuna, for pointing it
right.
out. That's great.
So the reason I'm saying no, right, and this is my rationale for that, is that the elevator pitch doesn't have quite enough content for what you want to provide when you're being asked the question, tell me about yourself. So if that's something you all are interested in, which it sounds like I'm hearing you are, I will pass along some information to Tiana about this, but what I will say very briefly is you want to highlight your background within like a 2-minute-ish, 2 to 3 minute response. Where, so again, for example, like my response to that question is always like, I have experience doing this type of work, right? So like operations, project management, right? Human resources across industries like higher education, technology, etc., finance, right? Whatever is the most high level response that you can give to summarize and encapsulate all that information, that's what you want to provide. And that's why this is very distinct and different from that elevator pitch. I hope that that's making sense, what I'm saying here. Okay, great. I'm seeing some head nods. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. So the elevator pitch is more of like a preview, but then tell me about yourself is like, okay, here's my background, a little more detail for you, and so they can get a bigger picture.
Yes.
Perfect. That's great. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, thank you all so much for attending. This was amazing, Fatma. Great presentation. It was so engaging. Such good information. I'll share out all the slides with you, the recording, so you'll be able to find that. Please feel free to email either Fatma or I if you have any other questions. I'll keep you posted about our part 2 workshop, and I believe that's everything. So thank you so much, and have a good start to your week.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
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 Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.